Mickey! The word burst from Margaret's lips like a prayer answered after 30 long years. The tall doctor in the white coat froze, his stethoscope slipping from his trembling hands. Tears began streaming down his face as he looked at the elderly woman sitting on his examination table. "Mrs. Williams," his voice cracked like the 12-year-old boy she once knew. "Is it really you?" Margaret Williams had come to Mercy General Medical Center that Tuesday morning for nothing more than a routine checkup. At 72, she'd seen plenty of doctors, but never expected to find the skinny, hungry child she'd helped at the food bank 3 decades ago standing before her as Dr. Miguel Rodriguez. "I never forgot you," he whispered, rushing to steady her as she stood up on shaking legs. "Not a single day." But let's go back to the beginning to understand how this impossible moment came to be. 2 hours earlier, Margaret had adjusted her purse strap and looked up at the tall glass building. The sign read, Mercy General Medical Center in big blue letters. She took a deep breath and walked through the automatic doors. Her old doctor had retired after 40 years, and her insurance company said she needed to find someone new. This fancy medical center wasn't her first choice, but her daughter insisted she go somewhere modern with all the latest equipment. "Mrs. Williams," called the young nurse with a bright smile, "Dr. Rodriguez will see you now." Margaret followed the nurse down a long hallway, her old knees creaking with each step. The walls were covered with pictures of smiling doctors and happy families. Everything looked so clean and expensive. "Right in here," the nurse said, opening a door. "The doctor will be with you in just a moment." Margaret sat on the examination table and looked around the room. There were certificates on the wall, a big desk covered with papers, and a computer that looked more complicated than anything she had ever seen. She wondered what her late husband Henry would think of all this technology. The door opened, and a man in a white coat walked in. He was tall, with kind brown eyes and graying hair at his temples. He looked to be in his 40s, maybe 50. "Good morning, Mrs. Williams," he said with a warm smile. "I'm Dr. Rodriguez. It's nice to meet you." Margaret smiled back, but something stirred in her memory. His voice had a slight accent, and there was something about his gentle manner that felt familiar. "Nice to meet you too, Doctor." Dr. Rodriguez sat down at his desk and opened a folder. "I see this is your first visit with us. Dr. Patterson retired, didn't he?" "Yes, after 40 years. I'm going to miss him terribly." "He was a good doctor," Dr. Rodriguez said, glancing up at her with those kind eyes. "Now what brings you in today?" "Just a regular checkup. My daughter insists I come every 6 months. She worries about me living alone." As he asked about her medications and how she was feeling, Margaret found herself studying his face more carefully. There was definitely something familiar about him, but she couldn't quite place it. "Mrs. Williams," Dr. Rodriguez said, looking up from his notes, "have we met before? You seem very familiar to me." Margaret tilted her head. "I was just thinking the same thing about you, but I don't think so. I would remember meeting a doctor." Dr. Rodriguez smiled and stood up. "Well, let's get started with your examination. Can you step on the scale for me?" As Margaret stepped onto the scale, she noticed how patient and gentle he was being. Most doctors she had met were always in a hurry, but he seemed to have all the time in the world. He explained everything he was doing and never made her feel rushed or unimportant. "Your blood pressure looks good," he said, unwrapping the cuff from her arm. "And your weight is right where it should be. Do you exercise regularly?" "I walk every day, around the neighborhood. It's not much, but it keeps me moving." "That's wonderful. Walking is one of the best exercises." Dr. Rodriguez made more notes. "Tell me about your family. Do you have children nearby?" "My daughter lives about an hour away. She calls every day and visits on weekends. She's a good girl. I lost my husband 3 years ago. We were married for 48 years. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from his chart with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss. That must be very difficult." "Thank you. Some days are harder than others, but I stay busy. I volunteer at the food bank on Tuesdays and Thursdays." The moment she said the food bank, something changed in the room. Dr. Rodriguez went completely still, his pen hovering over the paper. The color drained from his face. "The food bank?" he asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, St. Mary's downtown. I've been helping there for almost 30 years. It's important work. So many people need help, especially families with children. Dr. Rodriguez set down his pen and walked over to the window. Margaret could see his shoulders tense up and his breathing became shallow. Mrs. Williams, St. Mary's Food Bank. Do you remember a family that used to come there? A mother and her young son? This would have been about 30 years ago? Margaret's heart started beating faster. Something in his tone made her sit up straighter. Well, yes, there were many families over the years. Why do you ask? Dr. Rodriguez turned around, and Margaret gasped. There were tears in his eyes, and his hands were shaking. The mother's name was Maria, he said, his voice breaking. She worked 2 jobs, but still couldn't always put food on the table. Her son was about 12 years old. He was very thin and always hungry. Margaret's hand flew to her chest. A memory was pushing its way to the surface, like sunlight breaking through clouds. The boy had holes in his shoes and wore the same clothes to school every day. Some of the other kids made fun of him, but there was one volunteer at the food bank who always made sure his family got extra food. She would slip candy bars into their bag when no one was looking. Margaret felt the room spinning around her. Oh my goodness! She had kind blue eyes and always wore a yellow sweater on Thursdays. She never made him feel ashamed for being poor. Instead, she would ask about his grades and tell him he was smart enough to be anything he wanted to be. Margaret stood up so fast she almost fell over. The memories came flooding back like a dam bursting. The scared little boy with the sad eyes, his mother Maria, who worked so hard but still struggled to feed her child. The Thursday afternoons when Margaret would stay late to help Maria practice English. Miguel? She whispered. Dr. Rodriguez nodded, tears streaming down his face. Yes, Miguel Rodriguez, but you always called me Mickey. And that's when Margaret cried out the name that had been buried in her heart for 30 years. Mickey! Oh, my dear boy, is it really you? Dr. Rodriguez rushed to catch her as her legs gave out from shock and joy. They held each other and cried like they were family reunited after a war. I can't believe it, Margaret sobbed into his shoulder. Look at you, you're so tall and handsome, and you're a doctor. Mickey pulled back to look at her face, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. I never forgot you, Mrs. Williams. Never. You and your husband saved my life. Henry, Margaret said, wiping her eyes with shaking hands. He always asked about you and your mother. He would be so proud. I looked for you, Mickey said. When I graduated from medical school, I tried to find you everywhere, but you had moved and I didn't know where. Margaret sat back down, her heart pounding so hard she was afraid it might stop. We moved to the house on Maple Street about 20 years ago, after Henry retired. Mickey pulled his chair right next to her and took her hands in his. Mrs. Williams, I need you to know something. What you did for me, it changed everything. Oh, sweetie, I just gave you some extra food. No, Mickey said firmly, his voice strong now. It was so much more than that. Do you remember the day you found me crying behind the food bank? Margaret thought for a moment, and then her eyes widened. You were upset because some boys at school had been teasing you.
They had thrown my lunch in the trash and called me names because my clothes were old and my shoes had holes in them. I was so hungry and so ashamed. I didn't want to go home and tell my mother because she was already working so hard. Margaret remembered that day like it was yesterday. She had found the boy sitting behind the building, his thin shoulders shaking with tears. Her heart had broken for him. You sat with me, Mickey continued. You didn't just give me food. You talked to me like I mattered. You told me that being poor didn't make me worth less than anyone else. You said I was smart and that I could be anything I wanted to be. You were smart, Margaret said, squeezing his hands. I could see it in your eyes. You had such intelligent eyes. You gave me a book that day. Do you remember? It was about a boy who became a doctor even though he grew up poor. Margaret gasped and put her hand over her mouth. The biography of Dr. Ben Carson. I had bought it for my grandson, but he wasn't interested in reading. Mickey reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an old, worn book. Margaret couldn't believe her eyes. It was the same book, the cover faded and the pages yellow with age, but still in one piece. I read that book 100 times, Mickey said, holding it like it was made of gold. It made me believe that maybe I could become a doctor too, even though we were poor. I've carried this with me through college, medical school, and my residency. It reminds me every day of the woman who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Margaret took the book in her trembling hands. She could see her own handwriting inside the cover. For a very special boy who can achieve anything he sets his mind to. Love, Mrs. Williams. You kept it all these years, she whispered. Mrs. Williams, this book didn't just change my life. It saved it. What do you mean, dear? Mickey's face grew serious. After that day when you found me crying, I went home and told my mother I wanted to quit school. I was tired of being made fun of, tired of being hungry, tired of wearing the same clothes every day. Margaret felt her heart breaking. Oh, Mickey. But then I read that book you gave me. I read about Dr. Carson and how he grew up poor in Detroit, how kids made fun of him too, but how he never gave up. And I remembered what you told me about being smart enough to be anything I wanted to be. You were always destined for great things, Margaret said. I decided that night to become a doctor. Not just any doctor, but the kind of doctor who would help poor kids like me. Kids who needed someone to believe in them. Margaret was crying again, but these were tears of pure joy. And you did it! You actually did it! I did. But Mrs. Williams, there's something else I need to tell you. About my mother. Margaret looked up at him, suddenly worried. How is Maria? Is she well? Mickey's face grew sad. She passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. Margaret's heart sank. Oh, Mickey. I'm so sorry. But she fought hard, but in the end, it was too much. But Mrs. Williams, she never forgot you either. In her last days, she kept talking about the angel at the food bank. She said you were sent by God to help us when we needed it most. Margaret started crying harder. Your mother was such a wonderful woman. She loved you so much. She did, and she lived to see me graduate from medical school. She was so proud. I wish I could have found you sooner so you could have said goodbye to her. I wish I could have been there for her, Margaret said. They sat quietly for a moment, both lost in their memories of Maria and the struggles they had all shared. Mickey, Margaret said finally, tell me about your family now. Are you married? Do you have children? Mickey's face lit up like the sun coming out after a storm. Yes, I'm married to a wonderful woman named Sarah. She's a teacher at the elementary school downtown, and we have 2 children, Emma and David. They're 8 and 10. That's wonderful, Margaret said, clapping her hands together. I bet they're beautiful children. They are. And Mrs. Williams, I've told them about you, about the kind woman who helped their daddy when he was a little boy. They call you Grandma Margaret, even though they've never met you. Margaret felt her heart swell with happiness. I would love to meet them someday. I would love that too. And Sarah has been wanting to meet you for years. I've told her so many stories about you. What kind of stories? About how you always remembered my name, even when we only came to the food bank once a month? How you would ask about my school and my grades? How you helped my mother practice English so she could get a better job? Margaret had almost forgotten about the English lessons. She used to stay after the food bank closed to help Maria with her pronunciation and grammar. Your mother was such a quick learner, she said. She was so determined to give you a better life. She did give me a better life, but she couldn't have done it without people like you. Do you know that after you helped her with English, she got a job as a secretary at a law firm? It paid twice as much as her cleaning jobs. I remember when she told me about that job. She was so excited she could barely contain herself. That job changed everything for us. We were able to move to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, and I could focus on my studies instead of worrying about where our next meal would come from. Margaret shook her head in amazement. I had no idea that our little English lessons would make such a big difference. Every small act of kindness makes a huge difference, Mickey said. You taught me that, and now I try to pass it on every day. What do you mean? Mrs. Williams, can I tell you something? I specialize in treating patients who can't afford regular medical care. I work at the free clinic downtown 2 days a week, and I never charge families who remind me of my mother and me. Margaret put her hand over her heart. Oh, Mickey, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. I remember what it felt like to need help and not know where to find it. I never want any child to feel the way I felt back then, hopeless and invisible. Margaret reached over and took her face in her hands like she used to do when he was 12. Your mother would be incredibly proud of the man you've become. I hope so. And Mrs. Williams, you should know that you're part of the reason I'm able to help people now. You showed me what real compassion looks like. You always had compassion, dear. I just gave you a little food and some encouragement. You gave me something much more valuable than food, Mickey said. You gave me hope. You gave me dignity. You gave me the belief that I was worth something. Margaret squeezed his hands. You were always worth everything, Mickey. You just needed someone to help you see it. I've been blessed beyond measure, and meeting you again today feels like the greatest blessing of all. They talked for another 2 hours, sharing stories and catching up on 30 years of life. Mickey shows her pictures of his family, and Margaret told him about her grandchildren and how much Henry had loved hearing updates about their boy Mickey. Mrs. Williams, Mickey said as their visit was finally winding down, I have a favor to ask. Anything in the world, dear. Would you consider letting me be your regular doctor? I know you might prefer someone closer to your age, but I promise I'll take the best care of you, better care than anyone else could. Margaret smiled through her tears. I can't think of anyone I'd trust more with my health or my heart. Thank you, Mickey said. That means everything to me. And Mickey, I have a favor to ask too. Of course, anything. Would you bring your family to my house for dinner this Sunday? I make a mean pot roast, and I need to meet these grandchildren who already know my name. Mickey's face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. We would be honored, more honored than you could know. As Margaret prepared to leave, Mickey walked her all the way to her car. Mrs. Williams, he said as they stood in the parking lot, I want you to know that I think about you every single day. Every time I help a patient, every time I encourage a struggling child, every time I see someone who needs hope, I remember the kindness you showed me. And I want you to know, Margaret said, that helping you and your mother was one of the greatest privileges of my entire life. You both gave me as much as I gave you. Mickey hugged her one more time. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for letting me, Margaret replied, and thank you for saving so many others. As Margaret drove home, she felt lighter than she had in years. She had gone to the doctor for a simple checkup, but she had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found a piece of her heart that she didn't even know was missing. When she got home, Margaret sat in her car for a long time before going inside. She thought about all the nights she had wondered what happened to the little boy with the sad eyes and the holes in his shoes. Now she knew. He had grown up to be a doctor, a husband, a father, and a man who dedicated his life to helping others just like his mother and him. That evening, Margaret called her daughter. You'll never believe what happened at the doctor today, she said.
"What, Mom? Is everything okay with your health?" "My health is perfect," Margaret said, "but something even more wonderful happened. Let me tell you about a little boy I once knew and the incredible man he became." As she shared the story, Margaret realized that some connections are too strong to be broken by time or distance. Love, kindness, and hope have a way of finding their way back to us, especially when we need them most. The following Sunday, Margaret's house was filled with laughter and the smell of pot roast. Mickey's children did indeed call her Grandma Margaret, and his wife Sarah hugged her like she was family. As they sat around the dinner table, Margaret looked at the beautiful family she had helped nurture all those years ago, and her heart was completely full. "Grandma Margaret," little Anna asked during dinner, "Daddy says you're the reason he became a doctor." Margaret looked across the table at Mickey, who was smiling through tears. "Your daddy became a doctor because he has a big heart and he's very smart. I just gave him a book." "It wasn't just a book," Mickey said quietly. "It was hope." After dinner, as they were saying goodbye, Mickey pulled Margaret aside. "Mrs. Williams, I need you to know something. That scared, hungry little boy you helped 30 years ago, he's still inside me. And every day he thanks God for the angel who saved his life." Margaret hugged him tight. "And this old woman thanks God every day for getting to see what amazing things that little boy grew up to do." As she watched them drive away, Margaret understood something profound. Sometimes the seeds we plant in kindness grow into gardens more beautiful than we ever imagined. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to see them bloom in ways that take our breath away. The next Tuesday, Margaret returned to the food bank as she had every week for 30 years. But this time, she looked at every child with new eyes, wondering which one might grow up to change the world. Because now she knew that you never know which small act of kindness might be the one that saves a life. And in his office across town, Dr. Miguel Rodriguez kept that old worn book on his desk where he could see it every day. A reminder that sometimes angels come disguised as ordinary people doing extraordinary things with love.